Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Dissenter. I'm your host, as always, Ricardo Lopes, and today I'm joined by Dr. David Wolpert. He is professor at the Santa Fe Institute. Most of his work is in thermodynamics of computation, foundations of physics, dynamics of social organizations, machine learning, game theory, and distributed optimization/control. And today we're going to focus on a paper of his titled The Past as a Stochastic Process. So, Dr. Wolpert, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to everyone.
It's a pleasure to be here. Very good to meet you and everybody else online.
Yeah. So, just to introduce the topic, what is a stochastic process?
Okay, so a deterministic process is something that is governed, for example, by differential equations. It is something where the state of a system right now, and this the definition of state might be somewhat elaborate, but the state of the system right now uniquely defines its future trajectory. There is no randomness at all. So the idea of physics is that at the very foundation of physics, if you have a closed system, so it's isolated from the outside world, it is completely deterministic. If I were to tell you right now the precise positions of all the planets in the solar system and the sun, along with their masses and their velocities, and if there were no gas to sort of add some randomness, then I could tell you the positions and velocities of the planets millions of years into the future. Everything is deterministic. It's bang, bang, bang. A stochastic process is the general, well, formally in mathematics, what the term refers to is a general mathematical structure that allows us to talk about trajectories into the future that do not have that characteristic that they're all bang, bang deterministic. There is inherent randomness. So to give a simple example from the foundations of physics, if there were to be a quantum mechanical effects that have any kind of implication for the trajectory of the system we're interested in, then we have a stochastic process going into the future. But also more generally, if I don't have a system so precisely isolated from all other variables, and it's so small and easy to consider, like the planets in the solar system, then we as humans, phenomenologically, as a simple matter of practice, cannot avoid having stochasticity in all of our predictions about the future process. What are the stock markets going to be tomorrow? What's the weather going to be in 1 week? What's going to happen with the new power in the United States starting up today? What are the implications for the whole geopolitical system within a month? Things like this. These all have somewhat randomness, some degree of randomness, and also that randomness can grow. So in the most general sense, a stochastic process is a mathematics that allows us to analyze and investigate and make predictions using such stochastic processes.
So, but we're going to focus on history specifically here, which is what you do in your paper. So, what kinds of methodologies do you apply when studying history?
Okay, yeah. So, for example, if we were predicting the future, that question about the geopolitical situation 1 month from now. So, history. So, in the papers you're referring to of mine and many others, we are considering what's called deep history over very, very long time spans, phenomenology that applies to all civilizations. So the amazing thing, this was developed originally by about a group of about 50 archaeologists, something called the Seshat dataset. Seshat was an Egyptian god of, I forget what, to be quite honestly. And what it is a recording over century intervals, so the year 100, the year 200, the year 300, of about 50 different characteristics of a human society at about 30 or 40 different locations on all planets all over the world. And so it's a massive data set. It was a huge undertaking. The reason that so many different archaeologists and anthropologists and historians were involved was because they had to all agree on a common set of standards for measuring these 50 variables. What they found, astonishing, it almost can't be true, but it is that all civilizations across all time, all human cultures, there are very, very striking, clear trends in these time series data sets. All civilizations, all humans do the same kinds of things over intervals of century to century, where we're talking at the level of big geopolitical societies. Things like Latium, the plain of Rome, things like the plain that had Kyoto, Heian era Japan, things like Mesoamerica, the Mayas, things like this, the Khmer civilization, the Mekong Delta, the Mekong rivers. Those were all the geopolitical regions, and the societies that existed there over these time scales followed these very striking trends. Bizarre. It almost can't be true. It's like a joke from some science fiction movie, a grade B science fiction movie. So when I first encountered this, me and some of my collaborators, I didn't believe it. I dug into the statistics of this paper because I have a background doing machine learning. I've done a ton of different things in the past. But I found that nope, the statistics is correct. These conclusions are valid, but it was a first pass. There are some subtle things that they had not looked into, or not so subtle, in fact, some of them. So this is where me and some of my collaborators, we start to investigate these phenomena. And we found, for example, the following elaboration. It turns out that all societies, when they start getting going, so things like through the year 500 or so, ancient China, ancient Rome, so on and so forth, first they grow in size without any increase in their ability to perform computation, where you measure a society, how well it can do computation, in terms of things like how sophisticated is the monetary system, how good is the transport system, how many levels of bureaucracy, and so on. At first, every single society grows in size without any increase in its ability to perform computation. Then it stops growing in size, only increases, in essence, how smart it is, until it reaches a new threshold, and it's the same threshold for all societies, and then bang, now it can start increasing in size again. They all do this. So how can we measure these things? This is a very roundabout way of answering your question, but I'm getting there. How can we analyze this situation? 1 century intervals over, say, 5,000-6,000 years for about 30 different societies. Since these are 50 different variables, that is a teeny, teeny, teeny data set. It's far too small for the dimension of the space to use some of the standard time series techniques. You may have heard of things, you or your listeners, your viewers, like what are called autoregressive models, ARMA models, a nonlinear time series. These are the kinds of things that are used all over Wall Street and so on. Those require vastly more data than we have. So what we're doing is we're using some of the tools from the stochastic process literature, which allow us to say that we can view the dynamics of all these societies in this 50-dimensional space as though it were just a sum of 2 very simple processes. One is a deterministic trajectory. If my society is here, This deterministic component says we're going there in the space of characteristics of the society. But there's also Gaussian noise added to it. Wherever we end up in 1 century, that'll be a new position. So there's a new trajectory vector. And then we go in that direction where we add a little bit of noise, Gaussian noise to that. And we just keep doing this, a step by step by step, where we add noise at each step. This has many fewer what are called degrees of freedom. It's far, far simpler to fit to the data set. And that's actually what we have been considering in things like the paper that you're referring to, that more recent one, the past stochastic process. That is the underlying technical tool. It's called things like, if anybody wants to look it up, it's called Fokker-Planck dynamics, F-O-K-K-E-R, and then Planck is the very, very famous physicist, P-L-A-N-C-K.
So you might have answered partly at least the question I'm going to ask now, but what is a stochastic process framework? How does it apply to the study of history, and what can we learn from it?
Yes, so the what I just gave you is the simple example of Fokker-Planck dynamics, where you have what's called a Wiener process, W-I-N-E-R. These are all famous mathematicians, scientists from about a century ago, where you have Gaussian noise added to each step. There are many variations of this basic idea that you can do, where at each moment, the key feature of this that makes it so powerful and so easy to fit even when there's not much data is that we are considering only the present to figure out where to go next. We're not looking at the previous time steps as well. There's no hidden variables with extra memory, like in what are sometimes called hidden Markov models. We're ignoring all of that. We're approximating it away. That's what makes it powerful. And there are things you can do, like you could have the size of the Gaussian noise. The characteristics is called of the Wiener process. Those could change across your space. You could have there be more sophisticated ways of changing this underlying vector of directions and how it varies across the space. Your step that you're going to take and then add a little bit of noise to, how that step, the direction and the size of that step, how it varies across the space. You can vary all these kinds of things. What makes it, again, so powerful as a tool to analyze human societies is precisely the fact that you don't need to know all these earlier values of my state. To figure out where I'm going to go next, I don't need to know where was I yesterday, the day before, and the day before that. In contrast, things like what are called an autoregressive model or standard nonlinear time series, you need to know all those values as well. And that vastly complicates the entire analysis. So that's what makes it a good tool. The underlying philosophy is the following. There's a vast amount of work in social sciences, and I've done it as well because I used to do a bunch of work in game theory, but game theory as a field is kind of broken, so you can only do so much there. But the vast majority of social sciences, including game theory, they are based on introspection. We all sort of think about, oh, Ricardo, what do you think are the important issues concerning how a society will evolve? Oh, David, if I were a society, I would be paying attention to, I think people care about the rate of inflation. Okay, that sounds good. Let's put that as a variable. And when we're talking about just person-to-person interaction, social networks, what do we think is important? Well, my buddy Ricardo, do I think that Ricardo is somebody who was good to me last week? Yeah, he did me some good turn last week, so I'm feeling well to Ricardo right now. So I'm more likely to give him a little bit of slack or whatever it is that I can give. We do this all based on introspection. We don't do that for any of the other sciences. If you consider something like physics or chemistry or biology, it's crucially all based on observation. You let nature tell you, the scientist, what is really going on. When in another previous career, I was an aerospace, an aeronautics professor at Stanford. One thing that I used to say that I found to be so important about doing engineering as opposed to just pure theory is that provided a way for nature to tell me what the truth was rather than me to just introspect and think how it should go. Nature could take my brilliant, absolutely beautiful theoretical work, and then when it doesn't fly, nature turns around and says, so nature can turn around, I'm a human too. So nature can turn around and they can kick me in the ass saying, David, you thought you were so smart. You thought you had it figured out how the world really is. You're wrong. Your airplane just fell out of the sky. Go back to the drawing board. Think about it again. This whole body of work where we just had these 50 variables, far more than we would think about in terms of introspection. These are the ones that have been found working out in the archaeological field. In this case, by looking at these flow patterns, these stochastic processes, going through these spaces of 50 variables, we are allowing nature to tell us what is going on. We can sit here and think, oh, I would expect that once my society grows to be the following size, then it might just keep on growing. Doesn't have anything to do with the computational power. No, nature tells us. That's what's so important about this new body of work for analyzing history. It's especially very, very different from the standard approach in what's called history or historiography, which is all based upon storytelling. It's narratives. It's the last refuge of people from the 19th century who did not want to introduce numbers and mathematical reasoning into our understanding of the way the world works. That's in many ways, unfortunately, the profession of history. And this is just blowing that out of the water, just stepping around all of that to let nature tell us what's going on.
And in what ways is history a stochastic process?
Because the evolution is noisy. As you and I were discussing at the very beginning of this interview, we don't know. We can make some predictions and they might be likely to be true, but we don't know what the state of the world is going to be. Is Ukraine going to, well, to just sort of speak politically, is Ukraine going to face reality and actually form a peace treaty where Putin will get some of the territory but not have won? Or is Ukraine going to do a battle to the death? What's going to be happening to the Chinese economy? Right now, it's having a lot of difficulty. Is that going to continue, and is it going to actually impede the possibilities of China slowly taking over the South China Sea? Is the United States going to invade Greenland and the Panama Canal? What's going to happen to NATO? We don't know. These are all random. So that's the stochasticity. In the stock market, what's going to happen to the world stock markets? In Japan, the Nikkei, in the US, in Europe, what's going to be happening? These are all social systems. These are all part of history. They will go into the history books that are written about 2025, but it's random. So it is a stochastic process. That's the key. Everything in the real world is a stochastic process because we cannot model things down at the level of atoms and molecules, which we would need to do to actually be able to view it, model it as a deterministic process.
So, as an example, in the paper you talk about jumps in the sociopolitical complexity of polities. What can we learn about them through this framework?
Precisely because of I gave as an example, maybe I should have waited until now, these two thresholds. If you very roughly decompose the the dynamics of the systems in the space of 50 variables down to two separate variables. One, as I was mentioning, measuring the computational power of a society, and one, just its size, how many people are in your capital city, that kind of thing. So here is size, here is computational power, trying to get it right. And what you would see, there are very clear thresholds. It's a sawtooth pattern. It does this. It's not even a sine wave. It's very sharp. And it's true for all societies. And so what we have learned, we could discover a new society somewhere, figure out what is its population according to this measure, and what is its computational power according to this measure. We would see, oh, it is right now in between this jagged tooth and pointing down and this jagged tooth pointing up. So we could then predict, not exactly, but to high accuracy, its future is going to be that it will keep on growing its computational power until it hits that spot, and then it will be growing in size again. We can now do these things looking into the past. It's amazing. Nobody thought there would be these kinds of rules. It's almost like Isaac Asimov's Foundation series, but it's all driven purely by the data rather than by mathematics.
So just a few minutes ago, you talked a little bit about narrative approaches in history. Is a stochastic process framework supposed to replace them or to complement them?
Complement, I guess, more properly speaking. It's a very strange thing, the sociology of the sciences of archaeology, anthropology, and history. Mostly, I guess I'm talking about the West. So what happened was everything was very, very quantitative, numerical, economics. A whole bunch of the famous economists from the 19th century were also famous physicists, for example. And then there was also Darwinism and the idea that everything is a competition. All of that is completely accepted. It's true. But there was a political process in the West. It was called social Darwinism, eugenics. People misinterpreted, people who were not scientists, politicians, they had other purposes in mind of what they wanted to do rather than just uncover the truth. They took these insights and misunderstood them, misused them, just like misinformation. It's an age-old kind of phenomenon to try to argue certain races are intrinsically less advanced. They are all deficient compared to others. Of course, their race, of course, was the best one, and their country was the top, and so on and so forth. This was social Darwinism. This was eugenics, people going so far as to say that you should give rights for having children based upon the intelligence of the adult. There was then a very, very strong reaction against this. That reaction, it was very vicious, and it was an overreaction. There's similar things in the field of biology. There's always overactions and then overreactions. It's a way these fields very often tend to go, the ones that have large aspects to them that are not just mathematics based. But it was particularly pronounced. Anthropology and archaeology have started to recover. You can now talk about equations and so on in those fields for the most part. History still has not. It's now there are jokes made about how if you were to go to the annual meeting of the American Historical Association and propose a session on numerical approaches to world history, there's no way that anybody would even consider having such a special session. It's dogmatism, it's theology. That this is not what history is. And that thesis is actually very often presented associated with some almost moral reaction. That's to try to introduce numbers into these kinds of analyses of human nature is immoral, it's evil. It almost has that kind of a feel. Nobody says that, but they might not, that might not even be conscious, but that is how strong the reaction can be.
So I have one last question then. Talking about the future now and not so much about the past, would this sort of framework, a stochastic process framework, also allow us to make accurate predictions about the future? And if so, what kinds of predictions?
Of course, there's the cliche, prediction is hard, especially about the future. So yes and no. We are starting, this we is a very broad group, are starting to bring these analyses up to involving more recent data sets. The kinds of stuff I was presenting before, SESHAT, its successor, which is called Equinox, and many other data sets, is what's called the Human Atlas of, I forget what it is, the Human Atlas of something or other. These data sets mostly deal with the deep past. When you come up closer to the present, closer to the modern day, the past 500 years, your problem is no longer not enough data, it's far too much. Rather than only being able to record 50 variables, because that's all that's left in the ground that we can actually look at, now there are millions, trillions, billions of variables that you could actually consider. So to apply these tools to more modern situations, there is some work, a lot of it coming out of the Santa Fe Institute, people like Hidalgo and Bernardo Uber and Bernardo, I'm blanking on his name. It'll come to me. These kinds of people, Ricardo Hausman, these people are doing certain kinds of analyses along these lines. There's also work being done by a fellow called Peter Turchin. There's also me and some of my other collaborators are starting to try to analyze more recent data sets. It's a much more challenging exercise than analyzing the past because there's too much data now. There are other issues as well. In a certain sense, history is speeding up. So when we were looking at the past, what was going to be 1,000 years of changing of one particular society in the past can now happen in like a year, 5 years at most. It's very, depending, who knows how to precisely measure it, but it's very, very fast because population densities are so high and so on. And this has to do with scaling behavior, what are called nonlinear scaling properties of human cities and so on. And there's a huge amount of work by people like Luis Betancourt and Jeff West and Chris Kempis, other people associated with the Santa Fe Institute, and also many sociologists who were preceded them to actually start analyzing all of these data sets about superlinear scaling. What that means is that in a very real sense, the speed of historical changes is faster in large dense cities than it is in lower density ones. Population's been going up, so that's speeding things up. Technologies are changing very, very quickly. All of these things mean that what we could worry about for how accurate the predictions were for 1,000 or 2,000 years when looking at the past, now might be the only kinds of accuracies we could even hope to come to for looking into the future for 5 years, except now that we have so many more variables, so we're not even sure how to do it. So long-winded answer, but the end of it is, yes, these different approaches that I've been talking about can be used to make prediction, geopolitical, economic predictions. We are sociopolitical predictions. We are starting to think about how to do this, but it is far more challenging. And those predictions, when we do have them, are going to be far less certain. They're going to be less crisp than the ones that we did about the past.
Great. So, Dr. Wolpert, just before we go, would you like to tell people if there are any places on the internet where they can find your work?
The easiest stuff, I guess, is my Scholar page. You can also, I've got a website. I think it's called this. I think that's it. My own, so you can find a whole bunch of my stuff there, but mostly in terms of this kind of work, it's on my Google Scholar. The thing is, I work in a huge number of fields. I work in what we've been talking about today. I also work in computer science theory. I work in a field called stochastic thermodynamics, analyzing the stochastic thermodynamics of computers like the one in your head right now. You call it your brain, or the one that the other very similar computers that we're right now conversing over. I've got other bodies of work where I'm looking at foundations of math. I work on very, very many things. I'm still doing a little bit of machine learning. Way back like 40 or 50 years ago, no, not that long, 40 years ago, I was actually one of the original people doing machine learning before I frankly got bored of it. I got bored of it, and I was also actually kicked out because I came up with things called the no free lunch theorems, and people did not like those. It was pretty vicious. But in any case, so I've been working on all these kinds of things. So what we're talking about today, you can find it on my Google Scholar, but it's buried in with all these other kinds of papers as well.
Great. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Great. It's been really fun to interact, to have the conversation. Thank you very much.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. If you liked it, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights, learning and development done differently. Check their website at enlights.com, and also please consider supporting the show on Patreon or PayPal. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters: Per Ergo Larsen, Jerry Mullerens, Frederick Sundo, Bernardo Seixas, Olaf Alex, Adam Kessel, Matthew Whittingboard, Arno Wolf, Tim Hollis, Eric Alenia, John Connors, Philip Forrest Connolly, Dan Demetri, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Phil Kavanagh, Mikkel Stormir, Samuel André, Francis Fort, Tiago Nunes, Fergal Kossen, Hal Herzog, Nuno Machado, Jonathan Librant, João Linhares, Stantantia, Samuel Correia, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, João Eira, Tom Hummel, Sardas France, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Romain Roach, Diego Londonho Correia, Yannick Punter, Adana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavlo Stasevski, Nelek Bach, Guy Madison, Gary G. Alman, Sam Afzal, Adrian Yeager, Paul Tolentino, João Barbosa, Julian Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Douglas Fry, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Ponce Cortez, Ursula Litsky, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, Sonny Smith, John Wiseman, Daniel Friedman, William Buckner, Paul George Arnaud, Luke Lowacki, Georgios Theophanos, Chris Williamson, Peter Wolozin, David Williams, Diogo Costa, Anton Erickson, Charles Murray, Alex Shaw, Maury Martinez, Coralie Chevalier, Bangalore Atheists, Larry Dealey Jr., Old Erringbone, Sterry, Michael Bailey, Dan Sperber, Robert Grassi, Igor N., Jeff McMahon, Jake Zool, Barnabas Radix, Mark Campbell, Thomas Dovner, Luke Nissen, Chris Story, Kimberly Johnson, Benjamin Galbert, Jessica Nowicki, Linda Brandon, Nicholas Carlson, Ismail Benzliman, George Coriatis, Valentin Steinman, Per Crowley, Kate Van Goller, Alexander Hubbard, Liam Dunaway, BR, Masood Ali Mohammadi, Perpendicular, Jonas Hertner, Ursula Goodenough, Gregory Hastings, David Pinsoff, Sean Nelson, Mike Lavigne, and Dios Necht. A special thanks to my producers: Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Stafiniak, Tom Vanagdam, Bernard Ugni, Curtis Dixon, Benedict Mueller, Thomas Trumbull, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, Giancarlo Montenegro, Alnick Ortiz, and Nick Golden, and to my executive producers Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, Bogdan Kanivets, and Rosie. Thank you for all.